The wind whispers through the ancient firs, carrying secrets older than time, but none so chilling as the one Bigfoot unwrapped for me amidst those forgotten ruins. It wasn't just a sighting, it was a revelation, a silent, harrowing narrative etched into the very landscape. That day, deep in the hills, I stumbled upon a truth so profound, so disturbing, that it now haunts my every waking moment, seeping into the sanctity of my dreams with icy tendrils of ancient dread. The untamed wilderness I once called home, my sanctuary, has transformed into a living museum of horrors, its soil soaked with echoes of an unimaginable past. I, Alex, a solitary park ranger in the heart of the Pacific Northwest, swore by reason, by the undeniable logic of the natural world. But what unfolded before me shattered that conviction into 1,000 irreparable pieces. My life, before this encounter, was a symphony of predictable rhythms. Days began with the crisp bite of mountain air, the scent of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. My patrols were defined by the familiar trails, the rustle of deer in the undergrowth, the occasional distant cry of a cougar. I lived for the solitude, the vast, unbroken expanse of forest that stretched for miles, swallowing the petty anxieties of civilization. People often imagined a park ranger's life as one of constant excitement, but the truth was a quiet, steady dedication to preservation, to the serene majesty of nature. I was a man of the outdoors, my hands calloused, my senses keenly attuned to the subtle shifts in the environment. Folk tales, cryptid sightings, the whispered legends of Sasquatch and other elusive creatures. These were amusing diversions, campfire stories that held no weight against the empirical evidence of my daily existence. I'd chuckle good-naturedly at tourists who spoke of glowing eyes in the dark, attributing such sightings to bears, mistaken identities, or simply an overactive imagination fueled by the wild's potent mystique. Logic was my compass, scientific observation my creed. That morning, however, the compass spun wildly off course. The sun, usually a comforting presence, felt distant and indifferent as I ventured off my usual route, driven by an inexplicable urge to explore a less-traveled ridgeline. The underbrush grew thicker here. Ancient trees formed a cathedral ceiling, and the ground was uneven, forcing me to tread carefully. It was then I saw them. Not a fallen tree, not a natural rock slide, but an arrangement of stones unlike anything I had ever encountered in my years, patrolling these remote lands. They jutted from the earth in peculiar, almost geometric patterns, partially obscured by moss and clinging vines, yet undeniably distinct from the chaotic beauty of raw nature. Some were flat, rectangular slabs, others curiously curved, all of them massive and weathered by millennia of wind and rain. They were too regular, too deliberate to be a mere geological anomaly. My heart, usually a steady drum, began to quicken, a subtle tremor of unease rippling through my professional composure. I knelt, brushing away centuries of decaying leaves and soil, revealing more of the strange formations. These weren't just rocks. They felt like fragments of something sculpted, something alien to this landscape. The sheer scale of some pieces suggested an effort beyond any known indigenous tribe, at least those documented in our historical records. My pragmatic worldview, once so unshakable, began to fray at the edges. What were these? Who could have built them? And why were they so utterly absent from any geological survey or anthropological report? My mind, a bastion of rational thought, grappled with the impossibility of it. The questions swirled, tugging at the very fabric of my understanding. This was more than just an interesting find. It was a challenge, a silent defiance to everything I believed about the wilderness I so intimately knew. The sun dipped lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the peculiar stones, deepening the mystery. A shiver, unrelated to the cooling air, traced its way down my spine. This place felt different, heavy, charged. The silence, usually a welcome companion, now seemed anticipatory, holding its breath for something unseen. My ranger instincts, honed over years of observation, told me this was no ordinary patch of woods. It was a threshold, a doorway to something profoundly ancient and deeply hidden. The rational mind yearned for an explanation, a geological term, a historical footnote, anything to bring it back into the realm of the explainable. But there was nothing, only the cold, hard reality of these silent, imposing stones, speaking a language I couldn't yet comprehend. This discovery ignited a spark of obsessive curiosity within me, a compelling urge to uncover the truth behind these enigmatic structures, a pull that I knew, even then, would lead me down a path from which there might be no return. This story, like the secrets it unveils, runs deeper than the most ancient roots of these forests. If you are ready to delve into the unsettling true encounters that lurk within the untamed wilderness, then make sure to subscribe to this channel. There's more to the woods than meets the eye, and some truths are better left undisturbed. Or so I used to think. My journey into the heart of this enigma had only just begun. The initial discovery of the peculiar rock formations had been a jarring anomaly in Alex's otherwise predictable routine. Now, as the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the towering evergreens, the nature of these formations began to solidify into something far more unsettling than mere geological curiosities. They weren't just odd rocks. They were too regular, too deliberately placed, too weathered by an age that stretched beyond any conventional human history in this region. Running a gloved hand over a rough, moss-covered surface, Alex felt the distinct, albeit subtle pattern of worked stone beneath the verdant growth. This wasn't a natural outcrop. It was a wall, or at least the skeletal remains of one. The stones, varying in size and shape, were interlocked with an ancient precision that spoke of hands, not erosion. Some were massive, requiring immense effort to position, hinting at a community, not just a solitary effort. There were remnants of what looked like lintels, partially buried, suggesting doorways or windows now choked by millennia of soil and fallen leaves. The structures weren't grand, not like Roman aqueducts or Egyptian pyramids, but they possessed a crude, powerful dignity, a testament to an unknown civilization that had once carved a life out of this unforgiving wilderness. The sheer antiquity of it all was overwhelming, a silent echo of lives lived and forgotten long before the first Europeans set foot on this continent. This place defied every archaeological record, every indigenous history Alex had ever studied. It was an enigma, a raw, silent question etched into the landscape. As Alex moved deeper into the cluster of ruins, meticulously noting their positions and attempting to discern a pattern in their layout, an unfamiliar sensation began to prickle at the back of their neck. It wasn't the usual forest stillness, which was often alive with the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, or the distant call of a hawk. This was a profound, almost oppressive silence, a void where sound should be. Even the buzzing of insects seemed to have been muffled. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and Alex felt an undeniable sense of being intensely watched. It was the kind of feeling that made the hairs on one's arms stand on end, a primal instinct screaming of unseen eyes. The forest, usually a comforting blanket of nature, now felt like a predatory gaze. Then It came. A sound, low and guttural, resonated from somewhere deep within the dense woods to Alex's left. It wasn't a bear's growl, too deep, too resonant, almost vibrating through the very ground. It wasn't the snarl of a cougar, nor the howl of a wolf. This sound was something entirely different, a primeval rumble that hinted at immense power and an ancient warning. It pulsed once, twice, then faded back into the unnatural silence, leaving behind a chilling void. Alex froze, every muscle tensed, eyes scanning the shadows, trying to pinpoint the source. But the forest offered no clues, only impenetrable green and deepening unease. The rational mind, Alex's most trusted tool, immediately sought explanations. Perhaps it was a trick of the wind, an unusual acoustic effect within the peculiar rock formations. The oppressive silence could be attributed to the sheer density of the forest, or maybe some atmospheric pressure change. The feeling of being watched, an overactive imagination, fueled by the isolation and the unexpected discovery. After all, what else could it be? Alex had spent decades in these woods. Every sound, every shadow, every animal behavior was familiar. This was different, though. The growl was too distinct, too unsettlingly unique. Despite the self-reassurance, a persistent unease gnawed at Alex. The logical explanations felt thin, fragile, unable to fully quell the burgeoning anxiety. There was a subtle shift in the environment that Alex couldn't ignore, a disharmony in nature's rhythm. The usual symphony of birdsong was absent, replaced by an eerie quiet. Deer, typically skittish but present, were nowhere to be seen, their tracks noticeably scarce in this particular area. Even the smaller creatures, the squirrels and chipmunks, seemed to have vanished. It was as if every living thing, save for Alex, had been warned away, or had fled from something. The air, despite the warmth of the day, held an inexplicable chill, raising goosebumps on Alex's skin. The ancient stones around them seemed to hum with a silent, profound secret, and Alex, standing amidst them, felt like an intruder, an unwitting witness to something vast and profoundly strange. The wilderness, usually a source of peace, was beginning to feel profoundly alien and deeply, unsettlingly watchful. The oppressive feeling of being watched, coupled with that unsettling, guttural growl, had gnawed at Alex for days. Despite every rational neuron in their brain screaming to stay away, an inexplicable compulsion drew them back to the site of the ancient formations. It was an urge that transcended logic, a magnetic pull toward the unknown that Alex, a person who prided themselves on their stoicism, found deeply unsettling. The forest, which had once felt like a familiar, comforting embrace, now held an ominous allure, a silent invitation to a truth Alex wasn't sure they wanted to uncover. The air was heavy, almost electric, as Alex navigated the familiar path back to the weathered stones. The usual symphony of chirping birds and rustling leaves was conspicuously absent, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Each step crunched loudly on the forest floor, an intrusion in the otherwise still world, as they pushed through a particularly dense thicket of ferns. A movement at the edge of their peripheral vision seized their attention. There, partially obscured by the thick trunks of ancient firs, stood a hulking, bipedal figure. Its immense size alone was enough to steal Alex's breath, but it was the sheer presence, the undeniable reality of it, that froze them in place. This was no bear standing on its hind legs, no misidentified shadow. This was clearly, unequivocally, Bigfoot. Its dark, shaggy fur blended seamlessly with the shadows, yet its form was distinct, powerful, and undeniably intelligent in its posture. The creature did not charge, did not growl, did not show any outward sign of aggression. Instead, it merely stood, a silent sentinel, its eyes fixed on Alex with an intensity that pierced through the veil of fear. A primal instinct urged Alex to flee, to turn and run as fast as their legs could carry them. But an equally powerful force, born of pure, unadulterated curiosity, held them rooted to the spot. There was something in the creature's gaze that wasn't hostile. It was observant, almost expectant. Bigfoot held its position for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it turned its massive head slightly to the left, towards a deeper, less explored part of the forest. Then, it took a single, unhurried step in that direction, pausing to glance back at Alex, a clear, unspoken invitation in its steady eyes. Alex's heart hammered against their ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the eerie silence. Every fiber of their being screamed caution, yet they found themselves taking a tentative step forward. Then another. Bigfoot, sensing Alex's hesitant acceptance, moved again, maintaining a steady, unthreatening distance. It moved with a silent grace that belied its enormous size, weaving through the underbrush with an ease that suggested it was part of the very fabric of the forest. It never spoke, never made a sound beyond the soft thud of its heavy feet on the earth. Yet its intentions were clear. It was guiding Alex. The deeper they ventured, the more ancient and untouched the forest became. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air grew cooler, richer, with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Bigfoot continued its silent lead, occasionally stopping to look back, its gaze unwavering, ensuring Alex was still following. There was no fear now, only a strange sense of trust, a bizarre understanding that transcended language. Alex knew, with an instinctual certainty, that this creature was not leading them to harm. After what felt like miles, though time had lost all meaning, Bigfoot finally stopped. It stood beside a colossal, moss-covered rock formation that seemed to rise from the earth like a natural rampart. With another silent gesture, a subtle shift of its body, Bigfoot indicated for Alex to look beyond the natural facade. Pushing aside thick curtains of ivy and gnarled branches, Alex peered into the gloom. What lay beyond was a revelation so profound it momentarily stole Alex's breath. This was no mere collection of scattered stones. This was a structure, a massive, ancient edifice, clearly artificial, yet so thoroughly integrated into the landscape that it was almost invisible, unless you knew precisely where to look. It was far larger and more intact than the initial formations Alex had stumbled upon. A sprawling complex of cut stone blocks, some still rising several feet high, forming walls, archways, and what appeared to be the remnants of pathways. The stones were adorned with faded, intricate carvings, almost entirely worn away by millennia of wind and rain, yet still discernible enough to hint at an artistry Alex had never seen in any known human civilization. The air here was different, thick with an almost palpable sense of age and a quiet, mournful energy. This was not a natural phenomenon. It was the age of something grand, something forgotten, a sophisticated, lost civilization swallowed whole by the relentless march of time and the indifferent embrace of the wilderness. Bigfoot stood silently beside Alex, its massive form blending into the primeval surroundings. Its presence a stark, living contrast to the silent, decaying grandeur of the ruins. The creature had brought Alex not just to a discovery, but to a secret, a profound whisper from the earth itself. The mystery had deepened to an unimaginable extent, And Alex knew, with chilling certainty, that they were only just beginning to scratch the surface of a truth far stranger and more disturbing than anything they could have ever conceived. The forest had revealed its first true secret, and it was breathtakingly ancient. Bigfoot finally stepped aside, a slow, deliberate movement that allowed Alex an unobstructed view of the ancient ruins. The sheer scale and intricate design of the complex, now fully revealed, dwarfed anything Alex had imagined. This was not just a collection of tumbled-down walls, but an entire settlement, or perhaps a sacred precinct, stretching further into the dense foliage than Alex could immediately discern. Massive, interlocking stones formed elevated platforms, sunken courtyards, and what appeared to be the skeletal remains of monumental gateways. Some sections still bore the faint, ghost-like imprints of what must have been elaborate carvings, or murals, now faded beyond recognition, hinting at a forgotten artistry and a sophisticated culture. The architecture possessed an angularity mixed with organic curves that was utterly alien, unlike anything Alex had ever studied in history books or archaeological texts. It felt both primitive and incredibly advanced, a paradox etched in stone. The air within the ruins hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, ancient rock, and something else, something akin to a profound, lingering silence, a quiet hum that resonated deep within Alex's chest. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a stillness that pulsed with untold stories. As Alex's gaze swept across the moss-laden stones, a profound sense of sadness enveloped them, a melancholic weight emanating from the very fabric of the place. It felt as though the stones themselves were weeping, holding on to echoes of sorrow and loss from a distant past. Bigfoot stood nearby, a silent sentinel, its massive form blending into the verdant backdrop, yet its presence was keenly felt. There was an almost mournful quality to its stillness, its posture conveying a deep, reflective sorrow that mirrored the oppressive atmosphere of the ruins. Its large, dark eyes, though unreadable, seemed to hold an ancient grief, a sorrow that transcended the passage of time. Then, slowly, deliberately, Bigfoot began to move. It wasn't an aggressive movement, nor one of simple exploration. Instead, its actions became a series of fluid, almost performative gestures, a nonverbal narrative unfolding before Alex's bewildered eyes. It started by tracing the outline of a collapsed wall with one enormous hand, its rough fingers moving with a surprising delicacy. Then, it mimed the act of lifting, of placing stones, its body swaying with an imagined rhythm of construction, evoking images of the ancient builders toiling under a sun-long set. The gestures grew more complex, more urgent. Bigfoot's movements shifted, becoming less about creation and more about observation, about terror. It hunched low, its massive head swiveling as if tracking something unseen in the air above. Its body tensed, contracting into a posture of fear, its heavy breath audible in the hushed air of the ruins. It raised a hand, palm open, as if in supplication or warning, its eyes wide with an emotion Alex couldn't quite name, but which resonated with primal dread. It was reenacting a scene, a memory, a history etched not in stone, but in the very being of this forest giant. Bigfoot then began to move with a frenetic energy, its gestures depicting flight, a desperate, scrambling attempt to escape an unseen pursuer. It pointed towards the intricate carvings on a surviving monolith, its finger lingering on a faded symbol before sweeping its arm outwards, encompassing the entire ruins, as if to say, they were here. The narrative communicated through these raw, primal movements was one of escalating fear, of a struggle against an overwhelming, inexplicable force. Alex watched, mesmerized and increasingly unnerved, as Bigfoot's body language conveyed a narrative of a society caught in the throes of an unspeakable catastrophe. The creature's broad chest heaved, its facial muscles, usually impassive, now contorted with a simulated anguish, a silent scream frozen in time. The climax of Bigfoot's nonverbal revelation came with a heart-wrenching mimicry of destruction. It moved its arms in sweeping, violent arcs, as if tearing down the very structures around them, then clutched at its chest, sinking to its knees with a guttural, almost inaudible groan. It was a depiction of utter devastation, of a sudden, brutal end. The scene it painted was one of struggle, fear, and ultimate, unavoidable destruction. The focus of this tragic story was unmistakably the ruins themselves, the silent testament to whatever horror had transpired here. Bigfoot then slowly straightened, its eyes fixed on Alex, a profound, chilling message passing between them without a single spoken word. The creature had not merely shown Alex ancient ruins. It had shown Alex a memory, a devastating narrative of what had happened within these very stones, a story of an ancient civilization's demise, marked by fear and struggle, a story so potent it still resonated through the ages, whispered by the silent stones and reenacted by their unlikely guardian. The weight of this unspoken history settled upon Alex, heavy and cold, a premonition of truths far darker than any mere archaeological discovery. The forest had given up a secret, and that secret felt like a burden. The massive, silent form of Bigfoot remained beside Alex, a sentinel of forgotten ages, as Alex's gaze swept over the intricate, crumbling stonework. It was clear now, these were not just ruins, but a meticulously planned settlement, a city perhaps, or a sacred stronghold. The carvings, once vibrant, now merely hinted at the sophisticated culture that had once thrived here. Bigfoot began to move then, not away, but with a deliberate, almost ritualistic grace. It stepped into the clearing before the largest remaining structure, a central plaza of sorts, and with slow, ponderous movements, began a silent performance. Alex watched, mesmerized, as the creature raised its massive arms, then let them fall with a heavy sigh that seemed to ripple through the ancient stones themselves. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but a sound imbued with an ancient sorrow. Bigfoot gestured broadly towards the ruins, then brought its hands together, pressing them flat against an imaginary barrier, pushing and struggling against an invisible force. Its body language was raw, primal, yet undeniably articulate. It conveyed struggle, a desperate defense against something unseen but immense. Alex could almost feel the weight of that unseen pressure, the futility of resistance. The gestures continued, evolving into a narrative of profound distress. Bigfoot crouched low, its posture defensive, its head turning rapidly, as if tracking an elusive predator. It pointed to the sky, then swept its hand downwards in a swift, devastating motion, mimicking something falling, descending with terrifying speed. There was no mistaking the terror in its mimed expression, the way its shoulders hunched, conveying an overwhelming sense of helplessness. It was showing Alex a story, a terrible moment, frozen in time, reenacted through its own body. This was not merely an event. It was a recollection, a memory etched into its very being, a burden it carried. Alex's mind, accustomed to the logical framework of scientific deduction, strained to interpret this silent language, yet the meaning was becoming terrifyingly clear. Bigfoot was recounting a tragedy, The creature's interpretation began to solidify into a horrifying picture. It raised its hands again, forming them into shapes, first depicting a multitude of smaller figures. The ancient inhabitants, Alex surmised, living within these very walls. Then its demeanor shifted, becoming agitated, fearful. It mimed panic, scattering in disarray, while simultaneously looking upwards, its unseen eyes wide with dread. Bigfoot then flattened its palm, holding it out as if to ward something off, pushing against an invisible, overwhelming tide. It was fear, pure and undiluted, projected across millennia. What was being depicted was not a battle against another tribe, or a natural disaster like a flood or an earthquake. The gestures were too specific, too imbued with a sense of malevolent intent. Bigfoot wasn't portraying a physical enemy, but something more insidious, something that inspired a deeper existential dread. It was conveying a threat that descended from above, an entity or a force that evoked not just fear, but a profound sense of wrongness. It wasn't a creature to be fought with spears or arrows. It was something that instilled terror in their very souls, causing them to cower, to flee in desperation. Bigfoot's movements became more erratic, more desperate. It mimed figures collapsing, wilting, not from wounds or blunt force, but as if their very life force was being drained, extinguished. It showed an unseen grasp, an invisible tightening around the throat, a silent scream that never left the lips. The motions conveyed a sense of suffocation, of being hunted and consumed by an entity that targeted not the body, but the spirit, the essence of being. There was a palpable sense of horror emanating from Bigfoot, a resonance of ancient fear that echoed in the silent plaza. This was not a predator in the conventional sense, but a force of annihilation, something that preyed on life itself, leaving only husks behind. The final phase of Bigfoot's grim tableau was the most chilling. It stood tall, its massive frame trembling slightly. Then slowly, deliberately, it swept its arm across the entire expanse of the ruins. The gesture was one of absolute desolation, of complete eradication. It depicted the violent end, a sudden, devastating event that left nothing but silence and sorrow in its wake. The way Bigfoot held its head, bowed and heavy, conveyed an enduring grief, a loss so profound it transcended time. It then turned its gaze directly to Alex, its eyes deep and ancient, holding a warning that chilled Alex to the bone. The message was clear. This civilization wasn't merely conquered or destroyed by another people. It had been extinguished, not by fire or sword, but by something far more terrifying, something that had descended upon them, consumed them, and left these ruins as a tombstone for a forgotten horror. Bigfoot's final gesture was to point a thick, powerful finger towards the surrounding forest, then back to the ruins, a clear indication that the memory, and perhaps the threat, still lingered within these very hills. The very air around Alex seemed to grow heavy with the weight of this ancient, unspeakable tragedy. The silent, mournful narrative, conveyed through Bigfoot's raw, primal gestures, had settled upon Alex with crushing weight. A revelation so profoundly disturbing, it shifted the very foundation of their understanding of the world. It wasn't simply that an ancient civilization had been wiped out. It was the chilling, inescapable truth behind how they had perished. Alex finally understood, with a sickening lurch in their gut, that the ancient people who once thrived within these now broken walls were not merely conquered or displaced by a more powerful foe. No, these unfortunate souls had been consumed, utterly extinguished by an ethereal, predatory entity whose true nature remained shrouded in a terrifying ambiguity. Bigfoot had depicted a relentless, invisible force, a malevolent presence that hunted, absorbed, and then vanished, leaving behind only echoes of terror and scattered remnants of what once was. The horror wasn't just in the past event, but in Bigfoot's implicit, unmistakable warning. This entity still lurked, a patient, ancient menace within the very shadows of these hills. The creature's reenactment hadn't shown battles or sieges, but rather a slow, insidious creeping dread, a gradual snuffing out of life, one by one, until nothing remained. The gestures had painted a picture of people vanishing, of a fear that left no physical wounds, only emptiness and a chilling silence. It was a terror far more profound than any conventional warfare, a cosmic horror that transcended the known laws of existence. This wasn't a legend told by humans, prone to exaggeration and myth-making. This was a first-hand account, delivered by a creature that had witnessed the unfathomable. Bigfoot's eyes, devoid of malice but brimming with an age-old sorrow, had punctuated the silent story, conveying a depth of despair that spoke volumes about the lasting trauma of what it had seen. The entity, whatever it was, had left an indelible scar not only on the land but on the very spirit of this solitary guardian. It became undeniably clear that Bigfoot was far more than a mere inhabitant of these woods. It was a witness, yes, but also a guardian, perhaps the last remnant of a natural order threatened by this ancient evil that periodically stirred from its slumber. Its continued presence in these remote hills was not merely a matter of survival, but of vigil. Bigfoot was intrinsically linked to keeping this horrific knowledge contained, to preventing the recurrence of such an unspeakable tragedy. Its guiding of Alex to these ruins, its painstaking, wordless explanation, was a desperate attempt to share a burden too heavy to bear alone, a silent plea for understanding, and perhaps a passing of the torch of vigilance. The creature's existence felt intertwined with the preservation of this terrible secret, a sentinel against a force that threatened not just a single civilization, but potentially the very balance of life itself. The reverence and dread in Bigfoot's demeanor suggested a deep, ingrained respect for the power it guarded against, a recognition of its own vulnerability in the face of such overwhelming malevolence. Alex stood there, amidst the skeletal remains of a forgotten world, utterly overwhelmed by the horrifying implications. Their rational mind, trained over years of logical observation and scientific understanding of the natural world, struggled violently to process such an ancient, otherworldly horror. This was not a bear attack or a rogue cougar. This was a narrative of cosmic terror, made terrifyingly real through Bigfoot's undeniable testimony. The pragmatic, grounded reality Alex had always known fractured and crumbled. The wilderness, once a sanctuary of familiar challenges and predictable cycles, suddenly felt menacing and alive with unseen dangers. Every rustle of leaves was no longer just the wind. It was a potential whisper of the entity. Every shadow held not just the darkness of the forest, but the potential for something ancient and predatory to stir. The tranquility Alex had always found in solitude now seemed a cruel illusion. The vast, silent expanse of the forest, which had once represented freedom and peace, now felt like an enormous sprawling tomb, holding countless untold horrors beneath its green canopy. The air grew heavy, not just with the scent of damp earth, but with the palpable weight of fear and sorrow that clung to the very stones of the ruins. Alex felt a cold dread seep into their bones, a primal terror that bypassed logic, and went straight to the deepest, most vulnerable parts of the human psyche. The thought that such an entity could exist, could have completely wiped out an entire people without leaving a trace beyond the memory in Bigfoot's eyes, was a concept too vast, too terrifying for the human mind to fully grasp. Yet, here it was, laid bare by the silent guardian of the hills. The world had irrevocably changed in an instant, colored by the stark, terrifying truth revealed within these ancient ruins. The wilderness was no longer just wild, it was haunted, and Alex was now intimately aware of its darkest secret. Bigfoot concluded its silent narrative, a final despairing gesture sweeping over the broken stones before its massive frame straightened. Its deeply set eyes, filled with an ancient sorrow that seemed to echo the very age of the ruins, met Alex's gaze one last time. In that prolonged, wordless stare, Alex perceived not just a summary of the tragedy, but a profound, urgent warning. It was a message that transcended language, a clear imperative to remember, to be cautious, to understand that the threat was not merely historical, but a latent, ever-present danger. The creature's expression shifted subtly, morphing from the shared grief of a storyteller to the intense, focused gravity of a guardian passing on vital, perilous information. There was a sense of finality in its posture, a quiet dignity that spoke volumes of its burden. Then, without another sound, without so much as a rustle of leaves betraying its immense size, Bigfoot turned. Its form, impossibly swift and silent for such a colossal being, melted into the dense tapestry of the ancient forest. One moment it was there, a brooding, powerful presence. The next it was gone, leaving Alex utterly alone amidst the cold, stark reality of the ruins and the chilling weight of its revelation. The silence that descended after Bigfoot's departure was not the familiar, comforting hush of the wilderness. It was a suffocating, heavy void, pregnant with unspoken horrors. Alex stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the enormity of the creature's story pressing down, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. The once familiar scent of pine and damp earth now seemed tainted with a primordial dread. The rugged hills, which had always represented adventure and solace, now loomed like ancient monuments to a forgotten catastrophe. A profound, bone-deep tremor began to well up from Alex's core, a visceral reaction to the unspeakable truth that had been unveiled. Every fiber of their being screamed for escape. With a final, terrified glance at the silent, accusing ruins, Alex stumbled backward, then turned and began to retreat. The once familiar path back through the forest now felt alien and treacherous. The vibrant green canopy above, usually a source of tranquility, now seemed to press down, its shadows deepening into oppressive, watchful eyes. Every snapped twig, every distant caw of a crow sent jolts of adrenaline through Alex's system. What had once been the soothing symphony of nature was now a cacophony of potential threats, each sound amplified by a newly awakened paranoia. Alex found themselves constantly scanning the tree lines, half expecting to see the malevolent entity Bigfoot had described, or perhaps the return of the creature itself, its warning now echoing with a sinister promise of vigilance. The forest, once a trusted companion, was now a labyrinth of shadowed fears, its ancient trees whispering secrets Alex wished they had never learned. The wild, untamed beauty had been irrevocably marred by the terrifying knowledge that pulsed beneath its surface. The journey back to the cabin was a blur of heightened senses and raw fear. Alex barely registered the familiar landmarks, their mind consumed by the horrifying images Bigfoot had conveyed. Once inside the perceived safety of their cabin, the dread did not dissipate. The walls felt thin, fragile, offering little protection against the ancient, insidious evil that now seemed to permeate the very air. Sleep, when it finally came, offered no respite. The vivid images of Bigfoot's story and the oppressive atmosphere of the ruins began to haunt Alex's dreams. These were not mere nightmares. They were immersive, visceral experiences. Alex would find themselves back within the crumbling stone walls, the air heavy with an unbearable sadness. They would witness, in terrifying detail, the swift, merciless downfall of the ancient civilization, not as a passive observer, but as one experiencing the palpable fear of the hunted. The dreams often began with an unsettling quiet, a stillness that preceded a storm, then a creeping dread, an invisible pressure that pressed down from all sides, suffocating and relentless. Figures, indistinct and desperate, would flee from an unseen predator, their silent screams echoing in Alex's mind. The entity, whatever it was, never fully revealed itself, but its presence was omnipresent, a cold, hungry void devouring light and life. Alex would wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the terrifying sensation of being pursued by an invisible, ancient evil clinging to them long after consciousness returned. These nocturnal terrors shattered the tranquil rhythm of Alex's life. The peace they had once found in solitude was replaced by an abiding sense of unease, a constant vigilance against an unseen enemy. The tranquility of their existence, once a steadfast anchor, had been utterly obliterated. The silence of the remote wilderness, once a balm, now seemed to murmur with the echoes of ancient anguish, a constant, chilling reminder of the nightmare hidden in the depths of the hills. Each sunrise brought no sense of relief, only the grim awareness that the darkness within the forest was not just a lack of light, but a malevolent, living presence that had now seeped into the very fabric of Alex's being. The world had shifted, tilted on its axis, and Alex, once a simple park ranger, was now a reluctant keeper of a truth too horrifying to comprehend, too dangerous to ignore. The chilling revelation about the ancient entity, so vividly communicated by Bigfoot, left an indelible mark on Alex's soul. The weight of such a terrifying secret, coupled with the profound vulnerability it exposed in the fabric of their understanding, forced a difficult and ultimately solitary decision. Alex knew, with an absolute certainty that resonated deep within their shaken core, that this knowledge could not be shared. To speak of ancient ruins, of a benevolent Sasquatch, and worst of all, of an ethereal, predatory entity that wiped out an entire civilization, would be met with scorn, disbelief, or worse, a dangerous curiosity that could inadvertently reawaken the very horror Bigfoot sought to contain. The world, in its current state of rational denial, was simply not ready, perhaps never would be, for such a truth. Alex would become a silent guardian of this secret, a lone sentinel in a world blissfully unaware of the ancient terror lurking beneath its serene surface. This choice was not made lightly, but with a heavy heart. Recognizing the immense burden it placed upon them, the comfortable life Alex had cultivated, rooted in the predictable rhythms of nature and the solitude of the wilderness, was shattered beyond repair. It was no longer just a place of pristine beauty and tranquil solitude. It was a realm holding forgotten histories, ancient terrors, and a fragile balance maintained by forces beyond human comprehension. The very ground beneath their feet felt charged with hidden energy, the air thick with unspoken tales. Alex carried the burden of Bigfoot's secret, a silent testament to a world far more complex and terrifying than any adventure novel could depict. They were forever vigilant, forever changed. The dreams persisted, a relentless nightly assault on Alex's psyche. The ancient entity, though never fully seen, manifested as an oppressive presence, a suffocating darkness that hunted them through a spectral forest, its pursuit silent, yet inevitable. The faces of the ancient inhabitants, contorted in silent screams as they disintegrated into dust, flashed through Alex's mind. Each morning, Alex awoke drenched in cold sweat, the memory of the nightmares as vivid and real as the morning sun filtering through the blinds. These dreams served as a constant, visceral reminder of the disturbing truth hidden within the hills, a nocturnal tether to the unimaginable horror that lurked just beyond the veil of human perception. They were not just dreams. They were a continuation of Bigfoot's warning, a psychic imprint of the ancient tragedy, ensuring Alex would never forget. Life in the cabin, once a haven of peace, now felt like a fragile bastion against an encroaching dread. Alex continued their patrols, walking the familiar trails, checking on the wildlife, and performing the duties of a park ranger, but with a new, ever-present awareness. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every sudden silence, every shift in the wind's direction, now held a deeper, more ominous significance. The world was alive with unseen forces, and Alex, having been granted a glimpse behind the curtain, could no longer unsee the threads of ancient power and subtle malevolence woven into the very fabric of the landscape. Their senses were heightened, their intuition honed to an almost preternatural degree, constantly scanning for any sign, any whisper, that the ancient entity might be stirring once more. The encounter had fundamentally altered Alex's relationship with the wilderness. It was no longer a resource to be managed, a beautiful expanse to be appreciated from a safe distance, but a living, breathing entity with its own deep memory, its own ancient secrets, and its own dangerous inhabitants. Bigfoot's revelation had bestowed upon Alex not just knowledge, but a profound responsibility. The creature, the true guardian, entrusted Alex with a sliver of its burden, a shared vigil against an evil that transcended time and dimension. Alex understood now why Bigfoot had chosen to communicate this horrifying truth. It was a desperate attempt to ensure that if the original guardian ever failed, there would be another, a human mind now aware and capable of recognizing the signs. Sometimes, during patrols near the ancient ruins, Alex would pause, standing in silent contemplation. The air around the crumbling stones still felt heavy, charged with sorrow and an almost palpable sense of loss. Alex never ventured too close, a primal instinct warning them to keep a respectful distance from the epicenter of such destructive power. But they would watch, a quiet observer of the ancient land, a human in a world suddenly much larger and more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The vast forest, with its towering trees and deep valleys, now felt like a thin veil stretched over untold mysteries, a fragile boundary between the known and the utterly unknowable. The Sasquatch, too, was a constant, unseen presence. On occasion, Alex would catch a fleeting glimpse of a colossal shadow moving through the deepest thickets, or find a freshly snapped branch placed deliberately in their path. Not a threat, but a sign, a confirmation that the guardian was near, its vigil unbroken. These subtle communications were a comfort, a shared understanding that transcended language, reinforcing the silent pact between the human and the creature. It was a shared burden, a lonely existence for both, bound by an ancient horror that threatened to consume them all. The world hadn't changed, not outwardly. The sun still rose and set, the seasons still turned, and humanity remained oblivious to the profound dangers lurking in the shadows of its own forgotten past. But for Alex, everything was different. The innocence was gone, replaced by a deep-seated awareness, a perpetual state of vigilance. The beauty of the wilderness was now tinged with a solemn dread, its silence pregnant with unspeakable truths. Alex was no longer just a park ranger. They were a custodian of an unimaginable secret, forever changed by the Sasquatch's disturbing revelation. The whispers of the ancient entity, though unheard by others, resonated eternally within Alex's mind, a constant reminder of the profound, terrifying secrets that still lurk in our world. If you found this story unsettling, if the idea of ancient evils and silent guardians stirred something deep within you, please like this video. Your engagement helps us bring more hidden truths to light. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What ancient secrets do you believe still lurk in our world, just waiting to be discovered? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true tales from the edge of reality, where the veil between the known and the unknown is often terrifyingly thin.